you, everyone. Thank you guys for having me and for staging such a lovely talk. And thank you to all the printers who've been helping me for the last couple of days. So I'm just going to go through some work that I've been making over the past 10 years, and then we can do a Q&A at the end. So I'll start with my collage work, which some of you might be more familiar with. I started making that work in 2005. At the time, I was living in Paris, and I was doing research on a piece called Shade Compositions. And so I was doing a residency. I had a studio, but I wasn't working in like a formal studio way. I was doing more research and moving throughout Europe. And as a way to activate the studio, I started to make drawings that turned into photographs, and they were all really influenced by the architecture and ornament in a lot of the buildings that I was finding myself in. Here's like an image from that. Here's another. And so I was really fascinated with heraldry. I just really like the idea of, or the design formula of an image that's made of images that represent rank, position, power, status, pedigree, or sort of generational wealth. And so I thought, you know, what a great way to kind of like use this patriarchal hierarchical system to kind of create images that comment on popular culture today. And so I started to, in the beginning, recreate coats of arms from Europe, but using contemporary material. In the beginning, mostly looking through the lens of hip hop culture. And so I was using a lot of images within popular culture that communicate that, like jewelry, obviously, images of homes. And by using these images from popular culture, within the work, they become sort of politicized because they're working in a certain, they're taking on a different medium with a meaning within the context of the work. And so in a lot of ways, the creation of the images sort of sheds light on certain ills of society, because it's not my personal choice, but rather I'm taking the images directly from magazines, the internet, auction house catalogs, and et cetera. This is an early image that was based on the Royal Coat of Arms of France. That's the original. Italy. Spain. The UK. And so as I continued to make those works, I started to kind of move away from working from an original image and just kind of work intuitively, essentially creating my own language of heraldry. So replacing, you know, like the unicorn and the griffin with, you know, like video vixens and things like that. And this particular piece I put in the slideshow because it's kind of important, because it was kind of the beginning of a lot of the work that I'm making right now. And it was sort of like the beginning of me kind of finding the feminist voice within the work. Here are some images of the first exhibition of that work. So as part of the exhibition, I also included this sculpture, which was an amalgamation of several wrought iron grills that I had seen in Europe, but recreated in contemporary material. So that was mirror polished aluminum, faux Cuban link chain, or Figaro chain, excuse me, and a chrome rim. After that exhibition, I felt like I had created my own language of heraldry, and so in order to kind of validate that and also gain some more knowledge about the history and practice of heraldry, I went to the Royal College of Arms and convinced the current Herald of Arms, William Hunt, to do a video with me. And my purpose for the video was to sort of give the viewer some art historical reference on the work. I felt like the pop culture references were pretty clear. And so within that meeting in that film, I also convinced him to make me Pursuivant, which is a junior ranking officer of arms. Within heralds, you have Pursuivants of Arms, Heralds of Arms, and Kings of Arms. And so once I was made an honorary Pursuivant, I thought that would be like a great idea to kind of use this, patriarchal structure as a narrative within the work. And it kind of gave way to a trilogy of videos where with each time I would shift rank, there would be a shift in the work. As part of the exhibition, I also made three-dimensional versions of the collages that sort of commented on crests. A lot of people don't know, but crests are a separate thing. They're a part of a coat of arms. They're not actually a coat of arms themselves. This was the video. The video was called Perseverant. For this video, I used an antique frame. This is a 17th century neoclassical frame that I cut the corner off and centered it, and then recarved the bottom edges to meet the point, sort of creating this shield-like shape. And then the video is projected from the rear. This was the first time I started to incorporate antique frames into the work, and part of the reason for doing that was sort of as a way to kind of draw attention to kind of presenting the works as art historical documents. Also, it was a way of kind of extending what was happening in the picture plane to the frame. So the frames in some ways also became sculptural extensions of the work. In these early ones, I would cast material found in the collage and then add it to the frame, and then gild the frame. Re-gild the frame. And so at first glance, you don't notice these subtle changes, but as you read the work more, you get to see them. This is an installation shot.
Well, the present system of heraldry stems from 1127, which is the earliest known coat of arms. They are those of Geoffrey of Anjou, who was knighted by his father-in-law, King Henry I of England. And his shield, which was blue with gold lions on it, used to rest upon his tomb in Le Mans in northern France, and it's now in the museum there. We don't read about heralds, though, until 1170, and then we learn it was they who organised the tournaments. And not only did they organise them, but they acted as masters of ceremonies and kept the scores. And as people in tournaments became more and more difficult to recognise in their armour, they started painting on their shields some sort of symbol, which is what we recognise as heraldry today. Later on, a couple of centuries later, as the tournament became more and more of an elaborate pageant, the crest was invented, which would be made out of boiled leather or wood and bolted to the top of the tournament helm. An officer of arms is the name which includes kings of arms, heralds of arms, and pursuivants of arms. Those are three ranks. You start off here as a pursuivant, which is the most junior rank. Then you get promoted to herald, and then to king of arms. So an officer of arms encompasses them all, but herald is the middle rank, and people are known generally as heralds. It's like in the peerage system. We talk about peers, and many people talk about them as being lords, but the rank system there is Duke, Marquis, Earl, Viscount, Baron. I wish you luck on your learning curve. Perhaps see you here again another year.
So I'll keep going. The video is quite long, so I can't show the entire thing. But the video ends with a knighting sequence. And I decided to do my knighting sequence in New York rather than in England and within my community. And so after that exhibition, I was working on another exhibition titled Herald, which was the follow-up to that video. And at that point, I was thinking about, again, using that structure as a narrative arch. So I was shifting from Perseverant to Herald, and I wanted to mark like a visual shift in the work. As you saw, the earlier works were like really minimal, just one statement in the middle of the page. When I became a Perseverant, it was sort of about extending what was happening in the center of the page to the picture plane and incorporating these frames. And so now at this point, I wanted to really kind of think about one of the roles of the heralds and try to bring that into the work. So heralds would normally organize tournaments and keep the score. And so I was thinking a lot about tournament, but in terms of the work, like visual tournament. You know, like foreground versus background, picture plane versus frame, work versus work. And so that was sort of like the theme of the works in that show. At the time, I was working on a project with a rapper you might know, Little Kim. And she was in a very big beef at that time with Nicki Minaj. And so this work kind of reflected the, just what was happening between those two women, which was kind of interesting to me because at the same time I was working on another project that was sort of a portrait of hip hop culture from the 70s to, you know, to 2013. And so I was looking at thousands and thousands of music videos. And, you know, what was really interesting is in how the females in the industry, when they come in, are always set against each other. And so that kind of also spoke to this whole idea of tournament. This is another work from that show. This was also a really interesting piece. With this, I was really referencing landscape arms. Landscape arms is a division of heraldry that usually depicts a landscape where a great battle was fought and won. With this piece, as you can see in the middle of the shield, that building is Hot 97, which is a place where I was interning and working with on that other project that was a portrait of hip hop culture. And so when thinking about this space that I was spending a lot of time in as like this kind of like iconic place where so many battles were fought verbally, but also, you know, a lot of shootouts as well, I thought that would be a great comment on like a modern day version of landscape arms. These are installation shots. And this was the video that anchored the show. The video was called Herald. And sort of building on the last frame, I decided to go even more abstract with this one. And so that frame is, it's made up of various ornament from various different frames, but all kind of collaged together to make this really crazy frame. And so again, it played with this whole idea of tournament, and that the frame almost is trying to compete with the picture plane.
On
So that video was also a real big shift in the work because it was when I kind of moved away from working with the material in an analog way and moving into a digital space. I had become a little frustrated with sort of the limitations of paper and what was possible working that way. And my most formal training is in video and VFX. And so I wanted to kind of, do what I was doing with that material in the medium that I was more formally trained. And it just opened up all these possibilities in terms of ways of working with the material that eventually gave me a lot of ideas for going back to the analog process. And so I was invited to do an exhibition in my hometown, New Orleans. This is the New Orleans Museum of Art. It's an exhibition series called the Great Hall Series, where an artist is invited to sort of take over the museum. And it was just a great opportunity for so many reasons, but one in particular was with this new body of work, I was really interested in the beginnings of the Baroque. I felt like the work had been, very in concern with the language of the Baroque. And so I wanted to go back to the beginnings of the Baroque, which was the Basilica, and also like the original inspiration for the work, which was looking at architecture. And I wanted to do that also as a way of kind of like getting away from working with the body so explicitly. And so employing like the Vitruvian principle and looking at a lot of ribbed ceilings of various cathedrals as a way to reference the body without using it formally. The works work really great in this space because the museum hasn't really changed since it's been built, and it's kind of, in terms of architectural identity, it's kind of all over the place. It's sort of neoclassical, it's like German later, it's just like a lot of stuff going on. And so it was kind of interesting to show the work, which has all those elements in it, kind of in a space that was kind of like a collage of those things as well. This was the costume that I wore for a performance that I did. I normally, in the past, the work would be shown with the video of me shifting from one rank to another. With this particular exhibition, I decided to, rather than shoot the video and show it in the exhibition, use the exhibition as the site for the video. It was also a way for me to, it was kind of like my homecoming. It was my first exhibition, major exhibition in my hometown. And so at the time I was developing a new performance work that was really kind of part of my personal history. Like New Orleans is famous for mass processional performance, and a lot of my performance work was really kind of located in more of a modernist space where it was set up where, you know, the viewer sits and watches, you know, even though I'm kind of playing with that whole idea in my other performance work in that I am making a work and allowing the audience to witness the work being made, there still is that sort of like modernist structure of like sitting and watching. Whereas within mass processional performance, you know, it's about taking the performance to the street, and you know, it's for everybody, and the viewer can at once be looking but also be a part of it. And I felt like that was really important to do that also because there was so much work that I was doing with and about the Vogue community, which I've been a part of for over 10 years. And in its original context, that's how that is experienced. It's a very frenetic space where a performance is happening and then someone can just enter it and you can watch or just jump into it. And so I wanted to kind of bring that into the work. This was one of the sort of anchors of the show. Again, very clearly incorporating the Vitruvian principle. Also, I've always been like a big fan of Meissen china, and the museum had like a very large collection of that work, and so that work was very influenced by some of the stuff in the museum as well as stuff that I love throughout the French Quarter. And so it's actually not china, it's resin and wood, but it was painted with this kind of sort of scalping effect to kind of give the appearance of china. This was also another piece that was important. This is a very famous rapper from New Orleans named Juvenile, who was a part of Cash Money Records, which termed the coin bling, which is often used when talking about my work. New Orleans is the place that created that word, but then also just thinking about, I was thinking about early inspiration, artistic inspiration. You know, for me, a lot of my earliest inspirations really didn't come from like looking at, you know, canonized art. It came from looking at people in my community. As you've seen, there's kind of like an attention to car culture. You know, within my community, the car is a way of, for one, to express themselves. There's guys that, you know, family members and friends who don't necessarily consider themselves artists, but that was like their outlet for expressing themselves. And for me, that was like an early inspiration, but then also looking at, you know, like early Cash Money album covers and No Limit Records album covers. And so this was sort of an homage to, you know, those guys that inspired me. It was also a great way to put someone who I believe to be an icon within the context of Louisiana into the museum. There was a period when African American people weren't even allowed to go into the museum, and so it was very important for that work to be in there. And it was really interesting because we got to put it in the French Portrait Gallery, and so that was a real triumph. I think I'm missing a slide. And so when you get a coat of arms, you get it by way of a legal document called a letters patent. And so as, you know, the show was comprised of, you know, these sort of abstract ideas of heraldry, I designed a letters patent and worked with the curator on a text for it. And then it was signed by all the people that I worked with. And so for the mass processional performance, I collaborated with all the creative communities that I was a part of when I was living in Louisiana, but then also I had brought back, people that I collaborate often with in New York. And so it was sort of signed by all of us. I collaborated with McMain High School Band. It's one of the best brass bands in New Orleans. Also, several Mardi Gras Indian chiefs from the city. And then also several Vogue performers that I work with in New York I brought down, and then also Kevin Jay-Z Prodigy, who has been literally the voice of my work for the last 10 years. And Julie Gainey, a makeup artist who I've been working with for over 10 years as well. This is an image of the parade. And so every parade needs a float, right? And so I should say at this point also, if you're wondering about the frames, all the frames, when they're not gilded, I work with a body shop in New York. Some of you might be familiar with a TV show that's no longer running, but it used to be called Flex Full Throttle. It was hosted by Funkmaster Flex. And the show consisted of Flex interviewing an artist while their car was being customized. And so I work with that body shop on all the frames. And so they're painted exactly the way cars are. And sometimes custom colors that I go and mix myself, or stock colors from particular companies. This car, this was the first time I collaborated in a more even way with the body shop. The body shop owner and I are really good buddies, and he collects supercars. And so he had this Murcielago, and I needed a float for the parade. And so I thought that was a great idea for us to collaborate on that piece. And so there's a piece that I showed in the slideshow earlier that I created a vinyl from that piece and used that as the tincture for the car, and then we customized the wheels and the interior and everything, and I used that as my float for the parade. And so that piece kind of has gone on to have its own life. It kind of travels, it's part of the Dub auto show, and so you will see it in multiple places where there's auto shows. This was the works in the French Portrait Gallery. Also, as part of the show, the mayor made the exhibition opening my holiday. It's called King of Arms Day, as that was the day that I was knighted as a King of Arms. And so on that day, all artists are invited to City Park to make an artistic gesture. And so some time passed, and after that, I was working on another exhibition, and I was thinking a lot about how the works in some way can be seen as portraits without using the figure, and how heraldry is kind of like that. It's like a portrait of a person without actually without the figure. It's like what things that represent them. It's sort of like taking all the ornament and removing the figure. And I was thinking a lot about the community that I was working with and being inspired by, and certain performers that I had been working with for a very long time. And so I wanted to make portraits of them, but in a very contemporary way. And so within a ball, a Vogue ball, in the beginning, you have what's called LSS, and that stands for Legends, Statements, and Stars. Those are the ranks within the community. And in the beginning of the ball, all the legends, statements, and stars come out, and they walk the catwalk and do a little performance, and everybody pays homage to them. And so I did this series of collages called LSS that were dedicated to dancers that I had been working with for a really long time. This is the LSS series. It was also when I moved away from the more French and Italian Baroque frames to Dutch frames. I've always really loved Dutch frames, and I feel like I was thinking a lot about Dutch still life and how it is very much about like these kind of like themes of vanitas, and I think that's very rampant in the work. dealing with all these sort of like worldly pleasures and fleeting ideas of beauty, status, power, rank, and position. But then also how the images are collages, you know, so they make an image, but their image is made of images. And so while they can be something specific, they still collectively are made of very specific images. So can they not be seen as a still life as well? Because a lot of ways that they start is me working on my table and seeing things sort of like make sense together and then kind of like letting the material tell me what to do and bring that to life. And so I felt like the Dutch frame really sort of complemented the work. But it was obviously my version of a Dutch frame. And so they're covered in lambskin and painted in this custom black candy paint. And they reference, you know, sort of like fetish objects, but also car culture, like interior. Yeah. These were other works in the exhibition. This was more of like a tapestry. It was really influenced by ornament patterns that I was really fascinated with. This is a Arabic ornament pattern. I was also looking a lot at not only architectural spaces, but the plans for spaces. So this particular piece here on the right is based on the preliminary drawing for the St. Hugh's Choir Vault and the Pantheon. At the time, I had a studio in Queensbridge, and I was thinking also about like sort of modern architecture. And so literally from my studio, I could see the Queensbridge projects, which is kind of a rough place, but also an institution that gave way to a lot of really amazing poets like Nas and Mobb Deep. And so I wanted to kind of bring that version of architecture into the work too, with sort of this like Baroque reference as well. And so as part of the show, I did a video as well. And the video was, I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, like moving from collage to animation allowed me to, you know, do all these other things with the material. And so when I went back to the collage, you know, like within animation, I was using planes, you know, and using that as a way to create dimension. And it made the work appear to be much more 3D. And then I brought that back to the analog process, putting each image on a different plane. So while they look flat in reproduction, they're quite three-dimensional, sometimes 3 and 5 inches deep. And so I wanted to kind of also take some of those things that I was doing in the analog process and bring that into the digital space. So certain works in the exhibition I turned into environments and then shot dancers performing and then placed them in the environments. And it was a sort of a way to kind of, I had kind of moved away from the body a bit, so it was a way of bringing the body back into the work. And so after that, I had this really amazing opportunity. I was approached by SCAD University to have an exhibition in their the SCAD Museum, and I had recently finished the installation King of Arms, and so it was the first time I got to show the trilogy together. And so for the exhibition, I was thinking a lot about this whole idea of like processional performance, and so the way I set it up was this sort of cube in the middle of the space, and when you come in, you see Perseverant. As you procession around it, you see Harold, and you come around the end, you see King of Arms, and then when you come to the last side, you see sort of all the objects that I acquired along the journey. And then surrounding the cube were works related to each video in the trilogy. So that's like a snippet of that video. For the purpose of time, I'm going to keep going. And so I'm going to go forward a little bit. And so my recent show, which was called Stop Playing in My Face at the Buck Gallery, was really, it kind of came out of, I took some time off, and I was thinking a lot about, I got this question, what is your work about? Which is I'm sure there's some students here, that's a very art school question. And it's a question that doesn't really make sense to me, because for me, work can be about many different things, and at any given time that can change, and sometimes you don't even know what a work is about until it's in the world and it's telling you what it's about, right? And so when forcing myself to answer that question, what the work is about is sort of the importance and complexities of agency. And so the starting point for the work was I was really looking at past performances that I had done, particularly with trans women in the Vogue community. The trans women bring a certain je ne sais quoi to the community, in that there's a lot that they bring to the performance by way of the hair and performing in heels and things like that, and a specific dramatic style that really has always really influenced a lot of the forms in my work, which is why you see like the swinging hair and everything kind of like whipping around. And so I just started to look at stuff that I had done with particular iconic women in the field, and use that as source material for the images. But the thing is, I'm pulling these images that are informed by these trans bodies, but I'm working in a certain design formula in that I'm pulling images from popular culture to build those bodies. And so those bodies are not in the magazines, et cetera, you know? And so I'm using cisgender women's bodies to create these trans forms. And so I'm looking at the form and the bodies that I'm using to build that form and thinking about how these two bodies access agency within the world. And that was really kind of like the impetus for all the work in the show. And so first, I'll just show you some of the actual women that inspired the work. So I wanted you to see that so you can kind of make the connection with the work. And so within the work, I was looking at, you know, particular forms created within these events and happenings I was doing with friends of mine, and then creating these images. And the images are really abstract because in some ways I was trying to depict this sort of intersectional look at agency or feminism. In the beginning of creating the work, I really had issues with the word feminism because when thinking about it from an intersectional perspective and thinking critically about it, you know, feminism is, while it's done amazing things for women in general, it's also something that was created mostly by white women who had a certain amount of privilege to be able to, kind of create that path. And so that path is created at the expense of certain people. And so I was thinking about that, but then also thinking about sort of like my ideas of how I came to understand feminism and agency, which were really from academe, but I've always really been interested in ideas of agency and feminism outside of the academy, you know, like in the hood, in the club, in the music video, in, you know, these types of spaces where one would assume it would be very difficult for one to access agency, and sort of thinking about how inexplicably one's idea of agency is attached to whatever their privilege is, and life. So those were kind of like all the things I was thinking about when creating that work. This was a one work in particular. And the explosions, when I brought the explosions in the work, I brought them in earlier on in the LSS series, and it was a way for me to depict, the form, voguing as a practice, but in an abstract way without using the body. It's a very explosive dance. It's a really, it's a lot of energy from the center out. It's a lot of technique really fast from the center out. And so, but in this work, the explosions took on a different meaning. For me, I was thinking a lot about just kind of like leaving, because at this point I had left the narrative of heraldry. The trilogy was done. The work was moving in a different direction. And so I was looking at the explosions as like fire as a purifier. I was thinking about the explosions as not as the identity of transness, but more as a state of mind to transgress. And it was sort of like the obliteration of like past ideas in the work. This also, the frames were another take on Dutch frames, again connecting to this whole idea of vanitas, and these works are essentially photo collage, but also can be seen as still life. This work was really the beginning of the works in that series, and at the time I was at, I believe, the Headlands, and I was really kind of like reading a lot and thinking about how I was going to approach depicting bodies that don't have a body, that don't have a language. So abstraction is obviously the, kind of like the best place to start. And so the main image of the collage was actually like from a Video Vixen magazine with like a girl kind of like looking back at it. And so then I flipped it over, and what's funny is that she was still looking back. And then there was this other image that I had cut out previously of this kind of figure screaming. And for me, it just made sense to layer them, because it was sort of like I was thinking about this older idea of feminism that was very much about, not being in collusion with the denigrating image, but then also what I feel is sort of like this post idea of feminism. I have quite a few friends who work in the urban model industry, and I'm working on a separate project with them that will live in the context of a magazine that publishes those type of images. And I wanted to really complicate that whole idea, that whole question. This is often this idea of like, oh, how could she dare, show her body like that? But actually what's more complicated is, what if she actually wants to show her body, and, is it possible for a woman to actually want to celebrate their body without it being in the service of, the heteronormative gaze, the male gaze, whatever gaze? And so that was sort of what that piece was speaking to. This piece was very much influenced by like the Death Drop, which you saw a lot of those in the performances. But again, also this whole idea of still life with like the food. With this one, I was thinking again a lot about the gaze, the heteronormative gaze, this the male gaze, and so the figure is kind of like floating and moving through this space. And I chose those fabrics because, again, when thinking about agency, within the images they lived, they were just moving with such agency. They kind of were a great allegory for that. And the legs were really referencing the forms created by Erica Kane in the video when she was duck walking. And so the figure is kind of like moving through this space, and there's all these other gazes on it, and sort of like contemplating how it's going to move through that space. This was also a really important piece in the show, because, again, I was trying to depict these bodies that didn't really exist within this context. And so I was looking at architecture again. And architecture in the earlier work was really a way of representing the body without using it formally, but within the context of this work, architecture took on a new meaning. It was more about the building of the self that doesn't exist in the world. And so this particular piece of architecture is the mosque in Jerusalem. And within Muslim culture, unlike Christianity, you never see images of Allah or God. It's always depicted in this very abstract way. And I thought there was a nice connection between like me trying to depict this sort of like intersectional, liberatory, sexual image that doesn't really exist. So abstraction was the way to go, and that kind of really connected to what I was trying to do. I also brought back, you can see in the bottom, in the tabard that the figure is wearing, also the Arabic, the Arabic tapestry that I used in the earlier piece. Also, this piece was across from the other one. That piece is called Yes. And then the other one is like, you know, she's like looking and taking a selfie. So they're kind of like this conversation where she's like kind of like, you know, celebrating her while she's looking at herself in the cell phone. And so it was kind of like an act of solidarity. Also in that other one where that was also playing, I'll go back a bit, also playing with not only photo collage, but like portraiture. You know, when you, the selfie is like a photo that you share, you know, what you like most about yourself or with someone you admire, but then it's also this very intimate moment. And when you see a selfie in reproduction, you're seeing it, you know, an image of an image, because you're seeing a mirror, you know, the image through the mirror, through the phone. And so as this is an image made of images, it's like an image of 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 an image. So really kind of playing with that whole idea of perception and how that in itself can be a form of resistance. This is also another work that was in the show. This, with this work, the crown of the figure is the Liberation Tower in Bavaria. And, you know, again, I was thinking about this whole like liberatory experience or image. And you thought the piece was, I felt like the piece really kind of depicted a lot of what I was trying to say in the work. And so I was thinking also about how there's these bodies that inform the work that weren't formally in the work. And so I thought, it was time to bring that body into the work. And so I rebuilt this collage in Cinema 4D and shot one of the performers that you saw earlier on green screen and then placed them in the space. So she's like holding court over this sort of liberation tower. And so the video is a collage, but also the audio component is a collage, because the audio is like a collage of like snippets from different scholars and pop cultural figures talking about feminism and agency. And none of them necessarily agree, but they all have points. And it was kind of like a real poignant moment for me to kind of put that together, because there is no pluralist way of looking at it. You know, I think that's kind of the point, is that everybody's idea of agency is different, you know, and it's very much informed by their privilege, and to not honor that is to actually strip someone of their agency. And so the audio kind of speaks to that.
Using the same images that were used against us for so many years and taking control over them and saying, y'all are gonna make money off of it? So am I.
Giving you more pretty full coverage cut. Bitch, giving you more
giving you Brooklyn cut, Staten Island cut, Uptown cut, Queens cut. Yes, that's right, Bronx coverage cut. Giving you New York City full coverage television cut, bitch. Stop playing my fucking face. Are you still a slave? Are you still a slave? Are you still a slave? How do we begin to free the black girl body, the black boy body before they have undergone years and years of emotional assault and colonization? How do we free ourselves from those images to claim a different set of images? When did you become so weak? Stop playing in my face, girl. Weak. Afraid. She's colluding in the construction of herself as a slave. It's not a liberatory image.
So it's longer, but I'll keep going. Also, the show was titled "Stop Playing in My Face" because it was it's a catchphrase from a particular trans woman from the community called Samantha James Revlon. She's the mother of the House of Revlon in Philadelphia. And she kind of has her own reality show basically through her phone. And I'm a real big fan of it, and I watch it, and we're good friends. And so one day I was working, and one thing also about this body of work, it was the first time that I was really making things that read much more clearly as portraits. The other work was read much more as symbols. And so at one point I looked up and looked around the studio, and there was all these faces looking at me. And so the video was on where she was saying, "Stop playing in my face." And I was like, okay, that's the title of the show. But what started out as just kind of like an ironic moment really kind of became something a lot more involved, because I was thinking also about, the way in which she was accessing agency in the world, and sort of how, she's a trans woman who is battling addiction, but then also trying to become the first trans mortician. And she documents her whole life through her phone. And so, she's like the producer director of this reality show that's all made through her phone. And, people give her money so that she can fund it. And so is that not a form of agency? And so I was thinking a lot about that, but then also, also being conscious of the fact that what agency do I have? I'm sort of trying to create these images, but I'm also a cisgender male, right? And so there's later in the video, there's words from Samantha where she's in a mall, and she did her own makeup, and she was talking about how in the past people had tried to sabotage her by doing her makeup really bad. And she was saying how if you can't, depict me the way I want to be depicted, then stop playing in my fucking face, And so I thought that was kind of a really interesting point to bring in, because, that was sort of like the looming question. It was sort of me calling myself on the carpet as well. It was like looking at agency from every possible angle, what agency do I have over creating the images in the first place? Am I depicting these bodies that don't exist in an appropriate way? And so that was sort of why it was important for the show to be named that. And so also I decided to include these as well, because these works were also really influenced by looking at African art, specifically masks and certain sculptures, because their image is made of images. And so while they are something specific, the images that create them are also really specific. And there's very much, I felt like the work had always been in conversation with surrealism and cubism, but the narrative of heraldry in some kind of ways kept it away from that. But once I finished that narrative, it read much more clearly in conversation with that aesthetic history. But rather than looking at work from the canonized art world as inspiration, like Picasso, et cetera, which I love all that work, Hannah Hoch and all these people are huge. I admire their work a lot, but I wanted to go to the source. All of that work is very clearly inspired by African art. And there was this sort of eraser that has kind of erased all these practitioners who really created what we understand as Cubism, Surrealism, etc. And so rather than looking at that canonized work, I was looking at actual sculptures. And I think there's very much a connection between, these sculptures in that they're abstract, but they're quite specific at the same time, because those objects are not just meant to be looked on, they have a function. Whereas these images I'm making, you can look at them, but actually every object that creates the image has a function within the real world as well. Which one is this? Oh, okay. So now we're gonna go back a little bit and move towards what's happening here. And so this work is the first video work that I really did incorporating Vogue film performance. This work and another was shown in the Whitney Biennale in 2010. And I started making this work because I felt like it was completely being erased. It was something that was created by people in my community, and it was just being erased. It got co-opted so early in its creation. And there was very little material out there, specifically material by people who were a part of the community that practices this performance style. And so as institutions are supposed to be these sort of containers of history and culture, I thought that would be a great place to place it. And so I went into the community and found dancers that were very proficient in a specific style of voguing. This is Vogue Femme. Most people might be familiar with the movie Paris is Burning, and this is the style that came after New Wave, which is where the film ends. The style is made up of 5 elements that create the dance form, which are hands, catwalk, floor performance, spin dips, duck walking. And so I worked with this dancer. I had them just freestyle in the studio, and then I cut that footage into a video that I then gave them to study and then come back and perform. So it was sort of using digital technology as a means for choreography. And so this was that video, and this is the other one. Motion tracking software using, at the time, a camera. And using Max MSP and Jitter, which is a programming language I use in my performance work a lot, I built what's called a patch that would allow me to control the video camera that was connected to the computer. And based on the XY coordinates of the space the performers were dancing in, I could create a continuous line following their body as long as they were within a certain color spectrum. Later, the Kinect came out. And so that camera has like a 3D chip in it and recognizes the human form. And so I rewrote the patch incorporating that device because it allowed me to get a much more true tracking of the body, and also the specific part of the body that was most dedicated to that element within Vogue Femme. And the performance is called 5. It builds a lot on John Cage and Merce Cunningham's ideas of chance performance, in that I work with 5 dancers and choreograph a vignette based solely on that particular element of Vogue Femme. And then in parallel, I work with 5 musicians to create a sound score that sort of mirrors what they're doing visually, sonically. And then I work with 2 vocalists to kind of create a vocal score for the piece. But I work with everybody separately on a drum beat that's on a 4. And so the rhythmic structure is what binds everything on the night of the performance. And then during the performance, I use the patch to track the dancer's movements. And so you see the performer performing, and then you also see the form that they're creating being rendered in real time. These forms are later becoming sculptures that are one-to-one of the performance. And so what I've been doing here is making, to accompany those sculptures that are currently in production, prints that are sort of like the preliminary drawings for those sculptures. And so the prints will locate themselves. This is an image of like one of the forms. So you can kind of see what they end up looking like. And so the prints will locate themselves within, the language of lithography, but also reference all these other things that inform them. And so we also are working with, across the street with 3D printing technology to kind of make them 2D and 3D. They also reference my frames in that they have a foil in them, so they play with light in some ways similar to the way the frames play with light. Yeah. And so this is the performance that informs these works. it's longer, but we'll end there. And so yeah, there's a lot in this work, so it's like really hard to talk about it and show it all within a short amount of time. So by all means, ask questions about anything you saw that you're interested in. Thank you.